what she learned here. Imagine everything that we're doing here and how it goes out. So let's welcome our member of the board, Ernesto Ruelas. Ernesto is a professor and research scientist at the University of Veracruz, where he works with students on a variety of raptor ecology and avian ecology research projects. He received his PhD from the University of Missouri and currently serves as the editor of the Wilson Journal of Ornithology. Mm. And he sits on the board of Hawk Mountain. Ernesto was an intern in 1990. And then he went to launch the Veracruz River of Raptors website. Who has been to Veracruz? Okay, we need more people to go to Veracruz. Welcome, Ernesto.
Thanks for the introduction. It's really great to be here. It always feels like home to come visit Hawk Mountain again. And I often walk around some of the buildings where things were different, including our housing many years ago. It is has now grown into an amazingly big place. And happily, I still get to find a lot of my old friends from the time I was an intern. It's going to be hard to beat Jenny's stories because I'm really, really bad at keeping track of photographs, but there are some photographs of me back in the day in 1990. And in the few years that followed my stay in Hawk Mountain 34 years ago. Today, I'm going to be speaking about raptor migration in Mesoamerica, and I'll be speaking more about the Mesoamerican concept. But first, I wanted to thank Lori and the organizers for inviting me to come to this very important discussion. The process of discovering raptor migration in other places outside North America has been a very slow one, but also one that started many, many years ago. So the first few things that happen after you come to a place like Hawk Mountain is to find that a lot of the early discovery has already happened and that you're building on knowledge that was found by giants before you. But when you go to other places, when you come from places like Veracruz back in 1990, you find out that there isn't quite a developed story in other places. So a lot of it comes to actually engaging in discovery and not trusting your own eyes and your own accounts of how things are done. And the same happens for the area where I worked. I'm going to be speaking based on my own experience in Veracruz, but also my visits to many of the other places in Mesoamerica. And Mesoamerica is it's a section of sort of the connector between North and South America. It stretches from about the mid-latitudes of Mexico all the way to what is reasonable line of divide, the Panama and Colombia border. But because of the exchange that happened several million years ago, a lot of Mesoamerican fauna and flora extends into Colombia and South Americas into the Isthmus of Panama. But this is more or less what the literature refers to as Middle America or Mesoamerica. And I just read an article with a very heated argument about how we should call it Mesoamerica because it has a biocultural significance. It's not only the cohesion of the flora and fauna, but also the cultural manifestations from those areas, including the cultures of the Maya, the Olmec, the Aztecs, many of the indigenous cultures of Central America. So I will refer to it as Mesoamerica. And this place is very interesting for many reasons, and I have spoken here in Hawk Mountain about several interesting places. If you look at, for example, the eastern coast of Mexico, you find this incredibly wide coastal plain in the northern, I don't want to destroy something here, but in northern Mexico, you find this really broad coastal plain that stretches all the way until you make it to the mid latitudes of, of the country, right about here where Veracruz is. And you see the Sierra Madre Oriental constrains the width of the coastal plain to a place that creates almost a bottleneck here that further south continues becoming a really broad coastal plain. What happens here is that the coastal plain, with its very strong thermal convection fields, creates a sort of thermal pathway that facilitates the migration of birds from North and South, between North and South America. And the places where you have the most reliable thermal convection are those lowlands, and that basically paints the map of migration for a lot of these birds. The interesting question that I get often is, who discovered this flyway? And the truth of the matter is that we don't really know, because there are really early cultural manifestations of raptor migration, and one of them is this ceremony of the Totonac Indians, and the Totonac Indians raised from about 600 AD to about 1200, and this is written in the Codex Fernandez Leal from the 1600s, but it speaks about a tradition of having people like this man who is getting circumcised or something happening there to his genitals, and climbing on this post and dressing like eagles or big birds. And this is a photo from nearly 100 years ago of a place in Gutierrez Zamora in northern Veracruz, where they raised this pochota tree, and people climb on that tree. The man sitting on the top has a little drum and a little flute. He's not tied to anything. He just climbs up there. The men sit on. The men sit on the wooden frame, and after the initial ceremony and the praying finishes, they just drop to the back and start turning circles, imitating the flight of eagles during the dry season, right before the rains. So these people have a feathered hat, and they take 13 turns before they reach the ground. The voladores de Papantla are just one of those early manifestations. In the map of figuring out and discovering raptor migration, again, started probably around AD 700. And many years passed since another cultural manifestation of migration was found. But as early as 1557, Gonzalo Fernandez de Oviedo, who was one of the early conquistadores in the Americas, a few decades after Cortés had arrived in Mexico, in I guess less than 30 years after Cortés had arrived, wrote this big book on descriptions of the natural history of things in the Nueva España, and he documented flights of raptors in the Isthmus of Panama. Many years after that, the first scientists came to visit the region and started documenting what had happened. I'll tell this story in just a bit, but that happened all the way until 1898. Further down, 1945, Scotch in Costa Rica was the first to document heavy flights of migrants in the area. 1967, Busjäger and other people documented heavy flights of turkey vultures in the coastal plain of Veracruz. 1979, Palmer describes flights of migrants that were referred to him by letter, probably from observations from the mid-1940s. 1980, Fred Tilley discovers Tonalá in Chiapas. At the same time, Neil Smith had published his first paper on migration and documenting migration using film in the Isthmus of Panama. 1986, first records of raptor migration in Nicaragua. 1997, first documented report in Guatemala. So you can see a picture emerging of massive flights all over the region. And the story of Chapman is one of very interesting to me. Chapman was the curator of birds in the American Museum of Natural History, and he was commissioned to collect mice and small mammals in Cuba and in central Mexico. And he did something that he should have done, but he did, which is to take a boat from Cuba and also spend time collecting birds. So in the spring of 1897, he took a boat from Cuba to Veracruz City and landed there. And besides collecting the mice and the small mammals that he had been ordered to collect to fill a gap in our knowledge of small mammals in eastern Mexico, he collected birds near Veracruz City in a place called Jalapa in the March of 1897. Then went to another place called Las Minas and spent another 2 weeks there and documented what he calls endless flights of broadwing hawks. He went on to Mexico City and collected a lot of mice and lost track of the story right there. But it was one of the early reports of massive flights of migrants in the region. So after Chapman's observations in 1897, the word had gotten out about massive flights of raptors in the area. Purdue documented heavy flights in 1972. Thiollet, the French scientist who did a lot of research in the area between 1979 and 1983, documented also heavy flights. Palmer, as I mentioned, records from the late 1940s and early 1950s. Fred Tilley, that spent a few springs in the area between 1980 and 1987. Laurie Goodrich's on visit with unpublished observations collected in 1989, and so on. So the word had gotten out, and people have been doing some explorations of migration on this area. Some of the important things that we have learned about raptor migration in the area are something that are very different from what we know in the north. Back in the day, when I used to believe everything I read in books, I used to question myself about what we were observing. One of the interesting things is that the Mesoamerican flights are dominated by a different set of species than the ones you get to see here. So you come and do education programs in Hawk Mountain, and people tell you accipiters, and falcons, and eagles, and vultures, and turkey vultures, and so on. Right there, the flights are different story. These are the big champions of migration there. You have through Mesoamerica, we have something that has been estimated in different places to be about 1.8 million turkey vultures that move through the area. This is the true most abundant raptor migrating through Mesoamerica. Second is obviously the broadwing hawk with about 1.7 million. The numbers between turkey vultures and broadwing hawks have oscillated over the years, and sometimes this is the first place and turkey vultures is the second place. And those are the birds that dominate fall and spring flights. Third place is the Swainson's hawk, which is something that was a bit shocking for us because the Swainson's hawk should be expected to be a Western migrant. But this bird does an interesting pass in northern Mexico. They just stop being a Western bird and become an Eastern Mexican bird as they migrate south. 690,000 is the highest. This is the average estimate for the region. Mississippi kites, a bird that has recently exploded in quantity in all throughout our migration sites. About 230,000 recorded in the region. And what has come out of this collective story that has been taken over many different places is that the Mesoamerican Flyway is simply the most amazing, the most important Raptor Flyway on Earth. The big funnel that is the connector of Mexico and Central America is the only passage between the large body continental masses between North America and South America, and this is it. There is no other such a thing in the world. Eurasia is connected to Africa through several different places, so the flight is dispersed across many of those different flyways. And one of the initial tables that we composed after a lot of these data started coming out, these are approximate numbers only. Here are 3 key sites in the Mesoamerican region compared to a lot in Israel that at the time of these explorations began in about 1990, used to be the world's most important flyway for raptors known on Earth. And after that, once data from Veracruz and data from Quecoldy in Costa Rica or the Isthmus of Panama started coming out, we realized that having a single passage for migrants connecting 2 continental masses is something of a different scale. So something around 5.2 million raptors are annually recorded in Veracruz. This is the average of over 30 years. Quecoldy in Costa Rica should probably around 3.6 million. Panama, about 3.1 million. The data are scattered in different places and the numbers are not precise, but this is about what is happening. And compared to about 1.1, 1.2 million in a lot. They do get a lot more pelicans and a lot more storks and other things that than what we get in Mesoamerica, but we're strictly thinking about raptors right here, so you can ignore the central column of my table. There we go. Next slide. So having this incredible flyway and the challenge of possibly doing a lot of work in that area is something that is very exciting. It's something that has a lot of potentials of different ways. And one of them is the possibility of tracking populations of raptors. A lot of the counts that we do in many different places, including Hawk Mountain and many other places that now are on the hundreds, are important because raptor biologists can contribute to understanding the state of things in the world, right? So these counts have been used for decades now to track populations. So one of the interesting things about the Mesoamerican flyway sites is not only that they are nice and strategically located like Veracruz between the breeding areas of these birds for the broadwing hawk, for example, and the non-breeding sites. This is where Veracruz is. You can see almost the entire continental population for some species, or the entire global population for the broadwing hawk migrating through a single spot before they reach their non-breeding areas. The broadwing hawks that spend their time in sort of the southwestern part of Mexico migrate through Veracruz, go to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and then move west a bit. And so it happens for the Swainson's hawk and so on and so forth. What I wanted to say here is that a lot of the sites in the Mesoamerican corridor offer excellent opportunities to track these global or North American populations of raptors, but also it becomes really significant because a lot of these species, turkey vultures, probably the exception, but broadwing hawks, Swainson's hawks, and Mississippi kites are not well monitored in other sites. People get large numbers of them in Hawk Mountain or in some western sites or in some southern Texas sites, but their flights are not quite as consistent. They are quite noisy. They are quite sporadic. They're not safe passage places where you can rely on having about this volume of raptors or something like that. So what I mean to say here is that it covers a gap in coverage for a lot of these migrants. So a story like this can be told for the Swainson's hawk, for the Mississippi kite, and for other important species like turkey vultures. It also fills an important gap there. Turkey vultures make it all the way down to South America, probably among the longest distance migrants there are in the Americas. And that has been sort of the argument in support of establishing certain places. These photos are from the River of Raptors project in Veracruz, where we have ongoing migration counts in 2 different places. This is the rooftop of Hotel Bienvenido in Cardel, where this is a photo from the early 2000s, where field biologists are collecting counts of migrants. Here on the left is Chichicaxle with somebody collecting water birds migrating overhead. A banding station where since 1997, we've been trapping birds, banding birds, and bleeding them, and collecting feathers, and doing a lot of things to understand more about their migration ecology. Here's a picture of me back in the late 1990s with some accipiter there. So some of the really interesting things after many years of collecting this data and storing it in public repositories like hawkcount.org is that it allows a regular user to consult that information and to generate trend data based on these counts. So we can see for some of the 4 champion species like turkey vulture, Mississippi kites, broadwings, and Swainson's hawks, that the news for a change are not bad news. I mean, for many other bird groups, we have a lot of declines being reported in many groups of birds. But our turkey vultures and Mississippi kites, broadwings, and Swainson's are doing, they are stable, or they are slightly increasing. This has led people like Keith himself thinking that we were probably starting a lot of these counts at one of the historically lowest points in their populations, the DDT era, the open shooting of migrants in many places, and we are observing a recovery to healthier population levels. So this is probably something that is happening. It's not that these birds are not under stressors like other raptor migrants, but you can see that based on these counts, we don't have bad news to report for at least the 4 most important species. This is contrary to what has been found in many other groups of birds. Here is a graph I took from a report issued by Cornell and other collaborators of the state of the birds, where you can see that it's mostly water birds and the incredible work that people protecting ducks and geese and swans and the likes are doing in creating habitat and managing with the full annual cycle perspective what is being done. But this is not what is happening for many other birds that are experiencing, in some cases, really dramatic declines. Raptors are probably close to the horizontal line because those increases over 25 years or so of 1 or 2% are barely noticeable or different from the horizontal line. But the horizontal line is good news for now. Other things that doing studies over long term in the Mesoamerican corridor are opportunities for assessing other things, including the possible impacts of climate change in these populations. So I'm going to briefly mention two of the things that we've been addressing using data from Veracruz, and one of them is the possibility of using a system that has species of different migration ecologies. You have small birds that migrate what we can say are short distances, 2,000-3,000 kilometers, going between breeding and non-breeding season. You have transcontinental migrants, total migrants, obligate migrants, like the broadwing hawk. And you have in-betweens like ospreys who migrate mid-distances. And so the possibilities of studying species that have different migration ecologies, body sizes, diets, and so on is something that is of much interest. The effects of climate change on a lot of these birds are likely also going to be very different. There are always winners, or sometimes there are a few winners, there are lots of losers, and we have a lot of variation. I forgot to mention that during our counts, Mesoamerican sites are also capable of tracking other species of thermal soaring birds, like American white pelicans, wood storks, ibises, and many other things. So our raptor migration counts, the way people do in Hawk Mountain and collect other passerines migrating or hummingbirds and other things, we're able to track populations of 6 or 7 species of water birds. And that's another incredible opportunity because, to my knowledge, migration counts haven't been used to track populations of pelicans, for example. So this is a graph from my PhD student, Yolotli Morales Góngora, who is comparing the seasonal timing, the phenology of migration in the broadwing hawk and other 7 species, and how the 2 different sites perspective from birds from Cardel and birds from Chichicaxtla look different. So she's not only interested in seeing changes in whether birds are migrating later in the fall and earlier in the spring, but also how the different daytime weather patterns are affecting their numbers. So this is the seasonal timing curve for a lot of those species, and a lot of them seem to have more dented curves, with those ups and downs being more abrupt. So this is still on the works, but I wanted you to say that besides patterns that have been studied in many other places, we are looking at things that can only be studied in Mesoamerica. I have another student, a master's student, working on changes in the size of accipiter hawks. And same as I mentioned for the different species of raptors, the different sex and age classes of accipiters seem to be responding differently to climate change. We are detecting changes on the order of 1.5 to 2% in female accipiter hawks and Cooper's hawks, but the males don't seem to be changing at quite the same rate. So we are perplexed by the data. We are redoing a lot of the analysis just to be double sure that the trends that we are finding are not an artifact of poor statistics or something. But I wanted to say that a lot of these are surprising findings for us, and not that they are changing. A reduction in the size of migrants has been detected in many other species in many other places, but the perspective from the tropics is something that is evidently lacking. So to start summarizing and to be obedient to JF's 5-minute sign, I just wanted to say that in the last 30 or some years, and largely through the efforts of Hawk Mountain in selecting and training people from different places, we are slowly populating the map of not only having sites where exploration has been done, but places that have established hawk watches, and not only hawk watches, but conservation projects in several of these places. I can say that Veracruz has sustained raptor migration counts, education programs, and habitat conservation initiatives for over 30 years. Places like Kekuldi, who has had some gaps in coverage due to lack of funding or lack of trained people to run the sites, but Kekuldi is there, and again, largely through the efforts of Hawk Mountain. Panama has one probably 2 sites running long-term things, also finding some gaps over time, but they have been doing that for over 2 decades. New places are popping up, like Belize, who have been very consistent in collecting data from those places. So we expect that, here's another JF signed. So we expect that over the next decade or so, the amazing efforts that the Hawk Mountain capabilities for planting the seed of conservation and raptor monitoring and raptor science in many places will continue to develop and have more of these sites established. The connections of the Mesoamerican corridor to North America are evident. I mean, here's Becca McCabe's and Lori Goodrich's work, where virtually all of their birds are migrating through the area. We're finding connections between the upper Midwest accipital hawks in Veracruz. These are incidental records of band recoveries for different species. And this continues to be a largely collaborative work. The Veracruz River of Raptors is a result of the collaboration between Pro Natura Veracruz, Hawk Mountain, and Hawk Watch International. And the same can be said for some of the other places. I mean, you can see Hawk Mountain's logo and footprint in many of the sites. I'm excited to look forward to the future and see the Mesoamerican corridor being populated with many of those sites. And I think we have a great future ahead.
All right, we have plenty of time for questions if you want to hand mic up.
Yes.
Are there any theories as to why the Mississippi kite population is increasing?
It's a really great question. Mississippi kites are moving north. Their regular distribution range is shifting north. It's moving poleward, so it's colonizing more and more places. So if you were to think of their previously known range, it has expanded something. I haven't done the math yet, but over 20% over the original distribution from about 35 years ago. Somebody did a map, and I don't recall the exact figures, but something on the order of 20%. So over that period, since we started doing our counts, Mississippi kites during the first 2 decades of counts in Veracruz, they were increasing at a rate of between 6 and 7% per year. So this is an explosive number of them. I am aware of them now nesting in Connecticut and Massachusetts and places that are super far north for a bird that is actually quite a tropical species or mid-latitude species, if you want to call it that way. So the northward expansion of the range is creating opportunities for them to colonize other places, and that is reflected in our counts.
How important is ecotourism to raising like awareness and funding and stuff in that area down in Mesoamerica?
It's very important. It could become one of the key sources of income for sustaining a lot of these sites. Places like Panama or Costa Rica or even Veracruz have great potentials to being the main breadwinner for those projects, right? This has happened. I mean, in Veracruz, before I went to grad school, I was living there full time and stuff. And back until 2000, things were growing steadily and nicely, and we were making that possibility happen. I mean, we had a lot of tours, we had a lot of income that we could spend in the project. We were writing very few grant proposals because we were sustaining the project with ecotourism income. But then came violence the drug dealers and stuff like that. That has increased dramatically throughout the region, and it became unsafe for people to travel. 9/11 didn't help in so many things, right? So right after 9/11, our numbers went down. I think there was one group out of 12 that had been reserved. 9/11 happened, right before the migration season and so on. And it has grown slowly. And I hope that we can get to another point, because that's a possibility for sustaining these projects over long term, is to promote the visitation and dollars when translated into pesos or quetzales or soles. I mean, they become a different thing, and they are able to pay for a lot of stuff.
To follow up on that question, how would a gringo go about visiting them during migration?
Gringos can go down on organized tours. You can go on your own as well, but you're going to have an easier and better time joining a Hawk Mountain group or many others that are being organized. Not only you will have to worry less about many things like finding your own housing, getting yourself around, or practicing your Spanish when ordering food in restaurants, which is one of the difficulties once you're there. So I will recommend you going on a tour, and tours. I mean, people are taking the pulse of what is a good thing to do and what is not a good thing to do, which is something that a visitor that is not familiar with the site may make mistakes on, all the way from not selecting the right food to getting to places where that may get you in trouble, right? So that's my recommendation. Visit us in an organized tour, and that way you also make sure that the income that the tour organizer gets makes it to support a conservation initiative.
Ernesto?
Yes.
It's just been wonderful to hear you and Jennifer speak. And Jennifer made the point that bird conservation is just as much about people as it is about birds.
Yes.
And if I learned anything from Keith, it's great to see you here. I'm Steve Ed, by the way. It's that one has to focus on economic development for the people who are living in these areas. And I meant to ask Jennifer, but I'll ask both of you now. What are your biggest wins, and how do you balance economic development for the people living in these regions who may need to cut down rainforests, for example, to support their families today? What are your biggest wins in trying to balance economic development and conservation?
In speaking about the sort of the situation around Veracruz, I think the shifting of your economy being based on harvesting resources from the forest to being a service provider to a tour or the tourism industry is something that evidently will reduce pressure on the natural habitats. One of the problems that we have is that the scale of impacts here is tiny. I mean, we don't have enough visitors and enough people coming to site to make a dent on the economy there. It's also something that can get really concentrated in the months of September and October, and the year happens to have 12 months. So that's it's a different thing. So one of the things that are happening there that may be helping these processes, that a lot of people, Latin America is becoming a more urbanized region. We have over 70% of the people now live in cities. So we are experiencing gains in many of the habitats that were under heavy pressure. And so it's a very difficult question to answer, because it has so many elements and components, and a lot of them are outside your hands, right? Like a lot of them are dictated by external forces. So it's a great question, and it will be one worthwhile exploring further.
Any other questions? Wendy, do we have online?
There's one back there.
Yep.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about global warming. You said in your number on counts of
going more towards the end of the year versus in 1990, like October or so.
Well, yeah. So after reading a lot of papers on the impacts of climate change in changing the seasonality of migration, we thought it would be a piece of cake to find those things in our data, but it's been very difficult to document. I mean, you can see that some of the species move back and forth quite dramatically over time. For example, kestrels, they can have a variation in the timing migration window of 5 days, 6 days, but it's not a directional thing. 1 year can be 5 years that way, and then the next year it comes back. So it's something that basically tells you it responds to more immediate climate cues than other species. And in some species like broadwing hawks and Swainson's hawks, we have not detected any changes, not even 1 day. And one of the difficult things there is that the data itself are really noisy. You have weather effects, like daily weather effects that can move things 1 or 2 days back and forth, and we cannot distinguish those effects. And we're working on a manuscript as of right now to figure that out. And the answer is that it's really noisy out there to figure out things with the clarity that has been documented in northern places. Thank you.